Hey guys, what's up? Brandon here, coming at you with another Bad Company 2 gameplay commentary. And we've got some aggressive recon action here on Valparaiso. I've been playing a lot of Team Fortress 2 this weekend and some other stuff. We actually had a KB Mod gaming night last night on Team Fortress 2, which was awesome. So thank you anyone that's watching that came to that. And so I was going to use that some Team Fortress 2 footage for this video, but I decided to use some Bad Company 2 because a lot of this video will talk about PC builds, and specifically with emphasis on how these PCs will run Battlefield 3. So I thought, you know what, we're going to be talking about Battlefield. Let's get into the Battlefield spirit with some gameplay from Bad Company 2 to get us excited for the upcoming Battlefield 3. So I won't talk much about the gameplay in this video because I really want to get to talking about the PC builds I've got for you guys. But this is a fun round to rush. We end up winning. I think we play pretty well as a team, and we keep pushing forward at each point. So the one gameplay thing I will talk about really quickly is about C4 versus Mortar with the Recon class. So when I first started playing Bad Company 2 as a Recon, I used the Mortar exclusively, and I thought the C4 wasn't that useful. Interestingly enough, now it's the other way around. I almost always use the C4, and I rarely ever equip the Mortar. So why is that? Well, I think you'll see in this video that the C4 is super useful for guarding bomb sites and taking out vehicles. So you'll see coming up right here in a second, I just run up to this vehicle and put the C4 right on it. I actually think it's easier to take a vehicle out with C4 than it is with a mortar. Quite often the mortar just ends up hitting nothing because it's so easy to move away from. So it's something to consider. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. If you're sniping at long distance, obviously the C4 doesn't do you any good because you're never up close in the battle. But for an aggressive recon player, I think C4 is probably the only choice. And so I think the ability to have C4 and a powerful sniper rifle is why recon is my favorite class to play, because medic and assault are really only good against players, whereas engineer is largely the best against vehicles, but recon gives you the best of both worlds. I can take out enemies very quickly, but as long as I'm close to them, I can also take out vehicles with ease. So I think it makes you very versatile as a recon player to have C4 in your arsenal. Alright, so wow, I ended up spending 2 minutes talking about gameplay stuff. Anyway, time to move on to what I really want to talk about, and that is the PC builds I've got for you. So first of all, I'll kind of summarize the builds and what I'm talking about here, and then I'll move on to talk about each one specifically and kind of highlight the differences between them. Now before I go any further, I just want to say that these builds are just my opinion, okay? I think that these are probably some of the best builds you can get for your money, and that's why I'm showing them to you, and that's why I'm recommending them to you, because if I had, you know, the amount of money it takes at each of these price points to buy a computer, these are the parts I would use in that computer. But everyone is entitled to their own opinion, and I understand some people probably won't agree with the parts I've chosen, and that's fine. You know, I welcome all your feedback and comments to this video, but just remember that that there's not one right answer. There's a lot of great PC parts out there. I think these are the best ones that I've come across or that I have experience with. So just keep that in mind, and let's get to it. So I've put together 4 different build outs for you to look at. The first one is a budget build, the second one is more of a mid-range build, the third one is a pretty high-end build, and the last one is a very high-end build, which is good for someone who does multi-monitor gaming, or maybe if you're like John and you demand 60 plus FPS at the highest graphical settings in every game. I'll also briefly address my opinion on some gaming laptops. So anyway, let's get into it, and let's start off with what these builds have in common. The first thing you might notice is what they're missing. They're missing a monitor and an operating system. So I'm assuming that you're going to reuse your copy of Windows 7 or Windows XP that you currently are using now. And I'm also assuming you already have a monitor that you like. Also, these builds don't include a keyboard, a mouse, or any other peripheral stuff. Now let's get into the parts that are the same across these builds. So first off, I spec'd out all of them with an ASUS DVD burner as the optical drive. I figure that most people still need CD drives because a lot of you still have games on CDs, So you can certainly reuse your current optical drive, but I figure for any of you that need to buy a new one, this Asus one is probably the best one to go with. It's like 20-25 bucks, and it'll get the job done. Second, in all of these builds, I've put a Corsair modular power supply. Now the wattage may be different for the different price points, but Corsair is a good, reliable brand, and after owning a modular power supply, I would not go back to a regular power supply where you have sort of a tangled mess of cables in the bottom of your case. So I would definitely recommend, even if you don't like Corsair, go with a modular power supply. It makes a huge difference. It makes your case look much nicer. It's worth it. Speaking of cases, I've outfitted each of these builds with a Cooler Master HAF or High Airflow series case. I personally own a full tower HAF 932, and I've been extremely happy with it. It keeps my temps very cool, it has great airflow, so I'd highly recommend these cases. Next, each of these builds has either 4 or 8 gigs of G.Skill Ripjaw series RAM. I know several people that have this RAM and really like it. It's very competitively priced, and it's very highly rated, so that's in each of these builds. And lastly, all of these builds have a Western Digital Caviar Black in them, and that's what I have in addition to my solid state drive. It's a fantastic 7200 RPM hard drive. It's very fast, very reliable, and is my top recommendation for anyone that needs a hard drive. So now that you know what these builds have in common, let's talk about the individual builds themselves. So the first one I want to talk about is the low to mid-range build. So if you look at it, you'll see that this is the only AMD rig out of the bunch. I think right now Sandy Bridge is the best way to go for performance. However, AMD is still a good budget buy. Now I think the most important thing to notice here is that we went with a Socket AM3 Plus motherboard. Socket AM3 Plus is the new socket that Bulldozer chips will run on, and those are slated to be released from AMD soon. So this means that you can purchase the CPU that I've picked out now, and in a few months' time you could upgrade to a new Bulldozer chip, which should give you a massive speed boost. Also for this build, I've picked out an XFX Radeon 6870. XFX is the best brand in my opinion for AMD cards, and the 6870 is a great mid-range video card by today's standards. So next, let's move up the price point scale about $230 and talk about our mid-range build. So the main things to note here are that we switch over to an Intel chip, we go with a Sandy Bridge 2500K processor, and an ASRock motherboard. The other big change is that we switch over to NVIDIA for our graphics card, so we go with an EVGA GeForce GTX 560 Ti. Now I said that XFX was my favorite AMD card brand. Well, EVGA is my favorite NVIDIA brand due to their great customer service and the traditionally awesome performance of their cards. Not to mention that many of their parts have a lifetime warranty. Also to note here is that we've doubled the RAM compared to our budget build from 4 gigs up to 8 gigs. And we've also added an aftermarket CPU cooler, which will help a lot with our CPU temperatures and is pretty much essential for overclocking. So I've gone with a Cooler Master Hyper 212 Plus, which is the same cooler that I have in my machine, and it keeps my CPU idling at near ambient temperature. So next let's talk about the high-end build I put together. Now this high-end build is really just kind of an evolutionary step up from the build I just talked about. The main differences are that we've upgraded to an Asus Sabertooth motherboard, we've beefed up the power supply, and the big difference is that we've upgraded the video card to the fastest single GPU card on the market today, the NVIDIA GTX 580. So again, we've stuck with EVGA here, and we've gone with a superclocked version of their card, which has higher clock speeds than the reference GTX 580, meaning that this card comes overclocked right out of the box. So as I sit here right now, this build is a bit over $1,300, and I think this is probably the sweet spot for someone looking to build a brand new PC. I think this is about the best performance to price ratio that you're going to get. So while we don't yet know the exact system specs needed to run Battlefield 3 on high graphics, I know that this build will be comfortably above those recommended specs. So I feel confident saying that you will have a good experience with this machine in Battlefield 3. So lastly, let's look at what I'm calling the extreme build. But really it's not that extreme in terms of price, because some boutique vendors for these same parts would charge $3, $4, $5, maybe even $6,000. So the main differences here are: one, we've upgraded from the 2500K Sandy Bridge processor to a 2600K, and that gets you a marginal step up in clock speed, but the main difference is that it enables hyperthreading. So while that may not make a big difference in gaming, that could make a noticeable difference in applications like video rendering and other things. Let's see, I've also upgraded the power supply to 1000 watts to accommodate for our video card, which we've switched back over to AMD now, and I've put in an XFX Radeon 6990. So that's a dual GPU card, and like I said earlier, this would be a great option if you do a lot of multi-monitor gaming, or if you just absolutely want to have the top level performance in every game. This is the card for you. You could also, if you're an NVIDIA fan, you could substitute in a GTX 590, which is their dual GPU card. So either one of those is a good option. And lastly, I've added a crucial solid-state drive. So this will not necessarily help your frame rates at all, but it will dramatically improve your loading times from a traditional hard disk drive. My opinion is that a solid-state drive is definitely worth the investment, but I didn't include them on the other builds because they're still very expensive. So I don't have a ton of time left, but I did want to talk about one thing that some of you had brought up in the comments of my last video, and that's about gaming laptops. So it's hard to really give a strong recommendation for one because most of that hardware is pretty underpowered when it comes to gaming. But if I were going to recommend one, I think I would go with something like the Alienware M11X, or something else in the Alienware laptop series. Surprisingly, they're pretty reasonably priced by laptop standards. So take this for what it's worth, but in my experience, Dell has actually been pretty good about honoring their warranty, replacing parts and things like that. So I know there are probably a lot of you that have a strong opinion there, but that's just my 2 cents. Anyway, this video is coming to an end as we push to the final bomb site. I did put a bit of thought into these build guides, so I hope they helped you out. I encourage you to use these build guides as suggestions to mix and match parts and find the perfect PC for your budget. So if you have any questions about the build guides, PC building in general, or anything else really, the quickest way to get them answered is to follow me on Twitter and ask them there. And obviously you're also welcome to post a question or other miscellaneous comment in the comments section here. And if you enjoyed this video, please throw it a like and show it to your friends if they're looking to build PCs here in the near future. Subscribe to my channel if you enjoy this stuff. But as always, thanks for watching guys, and I will see you next time.